We're starting the Ezra Hashem Siman Kufa and Aleph and Vayom Moshe, meir Shal Shvuos, and we're talking here about the Achris Hayomim, the times when there'll be Shichkas HaTorah, and we won't know who to follow. So now he's going to make a point about who is under more influence of Zionism and who can't be trusted, who has more of a bias. V'hinei Adarim be'Eretz Yisrael. He's going to say that those who live in Eretz Yisrael, those poskim who live there, aren't qualified to decide on the issue of Zionism as much as people who live outside.
Why? Because
they're under more of an influence of bribery. Because basically, if they're going to decide, join the government, participate and get money for the yeshivas, they're going to be the ones to benefit from it. When we sit down to discuss this subject about whether to participate in the Zionist government and whether to recognize it and everything else, so you can't use those poskim in Eretz Yisrael. Reishis, hu din pashat b'mishnah Sanhedrin daf yud ches. This is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, it's a Mishnah. Melech loidan v'loidani noisoi. A king, you don't judge. He can't be a judge, and v'loidani noisoi, you can't judge him. You can't take him into Bezdin if he did something wrong. The Bezdin can't paskin on him. Why not? Because they're scared of him, because he has more power than them. So they won't be completely unbiased when they judge him. If
Reb Arlem Shaiman Shlita said anything about the because he's under their influence.
It could be, it's not a personal attack on anybody. He's just saying a klal that it's a Gemara. He's backing himself up with a Gemara. He's saying that when we paskin this shayla, let's say Aguda decided to go into the government. So who made the decision mainly? The Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael made the decision.
But they're under their influence.
Right. It should have been, according to what he's saying here, if Aguda wants to decide that, fine, but make the decision in Chutz La'aretz. Get Gedolim together in Chutz La'aretz, like Rabbi Cutler and Moshe, people who are outside Eretz Yisrael,
so
and they should be the ones to decide. Now we're going to see in a minute. Maybe let's just take a look right now. I have here.
So Rav Shach too got involved in politics because under the influence of the government.
We're not saying anything personal about these people. We're just saying that if you're going to make a decision like that, you can't make the decision with people who are under the influence.
I got it.
Okay, take a look. Reb Reuven Grozovsky, Bayer's Siman, page 18 here.
Yeah.
He says a whole 10, 15 pages all about participation in the government and how he holds us in the meir lishma. We discussed it a little bit earlier when we learned Siman Pei Zayin. Anyway, take a look what he says here. The first paragraph. Amarti ba'asifa. I said at the gathering, we here in America can't paskin on this shaila of joining the government. So he says the exact opposite of what the Satmar rebbe says. He's saying only the people in Eretz Yisrael could decide. I here in America, I can't decide. Why? Because this thing of participating is really an isser. It's only an meir lishma, right? It's an meir.
Before, we have to look like a demon forcing us, which aren't doing anyways in Eretz Yisrael right now.
Right. That even if we find out that it is for some purpose, it's mutter to do it for a temporary measure. That the Gedolim of Eretz Yisrael were matir it just for an emergency measure. We can't say that we're happy about that. And now I'm going to explain why it's an Aveira Lishma. So he goes on in length, he explains why it's an Aveira and why it's also to be Mischaber L'Rishayim.
But they're not acting this way, so they're either way not going what he says anyways here.
Yeah, okay. But my point is just, in theory, he seems like he's saying the exact inverse of what the Rebbe is saying.
I doubt it.
The Rebbe is saying here, only Gedolim in Chutz La'aretz, and he's saying only Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael. So what's the pshat? So I think like this. The pshat is that the Rebbe is discussing the Shaila L'Halacha. Is it mutter to have a Medina? Is it mutter to be mistarif, or is it not mutter? Okay? Yeah. Reb Reuven's discussing after we already came out that it's aser. You learn the whole Vayom Moshe from beginning to end. You agree with everything. Okay, it's aser. But now you want to do it because of Aveira Lishma. You still think that it's mutter because of Aveira Lishma, whatever that means. So on that shaila, you got to have Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael because they know whether it's Tzorech Hashah. That's what Reb Reuven meant.
But still, you have to act as if a demon force you, and they're not doing it.
Yeah, he says, Kivan Sha'adavar hu ma'aseh isser mitzalatzmai. Since it's an isser and it's only a very lishma, that's why the Gedolim Eretz Yisrael have to be the ones to decide. And take a look also in the Sefer Mikado Etzad Hei Be'ir, with the history of Aguda. He brings down itche meir levin said at some point, right after Hakamas to Medina, he said, Yashvu Gedoyle HaTorah. It's on page 1 of my notes here. Yashvu Gedoyle HaTorah v'Arab ba'eretz Yisrael b'mei Hakamas to Medina v'danu b'sugya zu. The Gedolim sat down and discussed the question of Medina. And obviously, we don't know when this ever happened. Higiu l'maskana. They reached the conclusion that Medina ain't a geula. The Medina is not the geula. Umidach kisa, umidach ena avoid zara or yitziras sitra achra, vasur b'maga. It's not the sitra achra. Lehepich yesh lasad hakol kadei lahashpi al kalvan mahalacha. We have to try to influence it in the proper direction. All right. So he says, Reb Tzvi Weinman, the author here, he says, Loi bichdi, loi ninkav b'maimer masai umi yashav wa yashvu. It's not for nothing that Levin doesn't mention who exactly were these Gedolim who sat down and discussed the Medina, because there was no such story. He says, Gam im amnam yashvu. Even if it was true that they did it, ha'im zui baya shirak Gedolim Yisrael shebe Eretz Yisrael tzrichim lanba. Is it something that only people in Eretz Yisrael could discuss? Zois gamim loy nekabel daitam shel elo ha'imim shal pi alacha yoshvim be'eretz Yisrael klal lo yecholim ladun ba'azu. We didn't negei b'davar. That's even if we don't hold like the Rebbe that only people in Eretz Yisrael are fakir, they're puzzled to this, to be done on this. So he's saying, first of all, you have the Rebbe's far, the people in Eretz Yisrael puzzle. Even if you don't accept that, and you accept everyone equally, fine. So then at least the Gedolim of Chutz La'aretz should also have a say in the matter. But this itche meir levin is saying basically no, only the people in Eretz Yisrael were the ones who paskin on this shayla. Okay. Anyway, weiter. So let's see where's this source for the Rebbe's psak. He says Sanhedrin daf yud ches melech loy dan v'loy dan yinoisa. You're not allowed to dan on the melech because you're afraid of the melech.
Who punishes a king for something bad?
It's a good question. I don't know.
The Nevi'im, I guess, would tell the king probably.
Right, the Nevi'im.
But right, Shmuel told Shmuel that you're so allowed to seed you, your kingship is your throne will continue.
So the Amruzeh, Chazal say this psak avura ma'aser shahaya. The psak was made based on a story. B'chaverav shel Shimon ben Shetach.
Who was king back then? Was it?
It was Yanai Melech. You're going to see Shekavshu Pneim the Karka, that they buried their face in the ground, the Emas HaMalchus, because of the fear of the kingdom. The Haya Aslan Gadol Rachman Litzlan. A terrible thing happened. Now, where's this? What's the story?
How's the story? Where did you find the story?
Sanhedrin Daf Yud Ches.
How's the story go?
It's really Daf Yud Tes. Bottom of Yud Tes Amud Aleph, going on to Yud Tes Amud Beis. So just let me see also. Read along. It says, like about 5 lines up from the bottom of Yud Tes Amud Aleph, it says, Ela Malchei Yisrael my timer loy. Why can't a Melech Yisrael be judged by the Sanhedrin? Mishum Ma'aser Shahaya. The Avdei Yanai Malka Katal Nafsha. The slave of Yanai the king, one of the kings of the Chashmonaim,
was Hurdus?
No. This
Who
is
was this?
2 generations before Hurdus. This is Yanai was. Some say Yanai was Yochanan. I think there's Machlokes Abai and Rav and Bachas of Yochanan.
He was 100 years old at the time.
Yochanan was the one who went off the derech and became a tzvi.
But he was like 100. He was 100 at the time.
All right, if you learn
the
right.
age, it was somebody else.
Well, he wasn't old. He was king for a very long time. He was a Rasha at the end of his
But
life.
he was 80 years at Kohen Gadol. How long could he have been? He was 20 years at Kohen Gadol.
Yeah, when Victor Miller says 80 years was his whole life, that's all it means. It doesn't mean he was 80 years at Kohen Gadol. Whatever. Anyway, Yanai, because you look in the history, you see there wasn't that much time. You can't give him that many years. Anyway, so the Yanai Malka Katal Nafsha. So Avdei the Yanai Malka Katal Nafsha. The Eved of Yanai killed somebody.
Right.
Amar Lahu Shimon ben Shetach lechachamim Tenu einechem boy unendunenu. Let's go and judge him. So Shalchulei Avdecha Katal Nafsha. They sent a message to Yanai and they said, your slave killed somebody. Shadrei Lahu. So send him over here. Right? Oh, Shadrelu, he sent the Eved to the Sanhedrin. Shalchule, the Sanhedrin sent back to him, Ta ant nami lahacha. You also come down to the Sanhedrin. Because v'hu ad bivalav amr Torah. The Torah says that when you punish a shor hamazik, you have to have the bailam there. Yavoy bal shor v'yamud al shoyrei. So here the Eved is getting punished. The owner of the Eved has to come down too. Asta v'yasiv. So the king Yanai came down to the Sanhedrin and he sat down in front of them. So Amar Leishem ben Shetach, Yanai Amelech Amoy al Raglecha. He said, stand up. You're in front of the Sanhedrin now. You have to stand up. Let them say agudas against you. You're not standing up for our honor. You're standing up for Hashem's honor. It says in the Torah, those people who have this dispute have to stand up in front of the Beis Din, in front of Hashem. So Yanai said, I'm not just going to do it because you tell me. I want everyone to tell me. I want to see if the rest of the Sanhedrin agrees to what you're saying. So Nifnali Minoi, Shimon ben Shetach turned to his right, Kavshu Pneim Bekarka. All the members of the Sanhedrin buried their faces in the ground.
Why?
Because they were afraid of him. They're afraid of the king.
Well, but he had no soldiers by him.
Maybe he did have soldiers first of all, we'll see. But
or maybe they were sent them after they punished him. Yeah.
But Nifnali Smoila, he turned to his left side. The Kavshu Pneim Bekarka. All the rest of the Sanhedrin buried their faces. So Amr Lahen, Shimon ben Shetach said to the Sanhedrin, Shimon ben Shetach, Baalei machshavos atem. You're thinking in your thoughts and you're not saying out with words. You're afraid to speak out. Yavoi baal machshavos v'yipara mikem. Let Hashem, who knows thoughts, come and punish you. Miyad ba Gavriel v'chavton bekarka u'mesu. Gavriel Malach came down and killed all the Sanhedrin. At that point, they said, Xavier, from then on, Melech loidan v'loidan inoisai. We don't judge kings. Loi meid v'loi meid inoisai. Okay. Yeah. That's the story of Shimon ben Shetach. And by the way, I just wanted to show you in Josephus, he brings the same story.
Oh no, Josephus, please.
Yeah, I just want to show you. Very interesting how he brings it. He brings it with hurdas instead of with Yanai.
Oh please.
Okay, so
we don't want to rely on the God.
We're not relying. I'm just trying to show you that he has a different version a little bit when it happened, but it's the exact same story. He says that Hyrcanus, instead of Yana, he makes a Hyrcanus. A couple generations later, Hyrcanus had an Eved named Antipater, and Antipater's son was Herod. And he says here that Herod killed some people who were really chayav misa. They were really like robbers, and they killed people. But since they weren't standing in front of the Sanhedrin, he didn't have a right to kill them. And the mothers of those people came and complained. So because of that, Hyrcanus... the mother said to the Sanhedrin, bring Hyrcanus down and have him executed for what he did. So he came down, but he came down with his bodyguards, and he came down dressed like a king. And he stood in front of the Sanhedrin, and not only that, Sextus Caesar, the president of Syria, wrote to Hyrcanus and said, make sure that Hyrcanus gets cleared. Make sure they don't punish him. So he stood in front of the Sanhedrin with his bodyguards around him, and nobody spoke against him. Everyone was silent. And all of a sudden, somebody named Samius, he says, a righteous man he was, rose up and said, "Oh, you who are assessors with me, I have never seen such a thing before." I'm just skipping around, but he says, "I've never seen such a person before come before Sanhedrin." When someone comes to be donned by Sanhedrin, he comes in with submissiveness. He comes in with ripped clothes and black clothes. But this guy Hyrcanus, he's coming in with royal clothing with purple, and his hair is nicely trimmed, and he has armed men around him, and then and he wants us to acquit him, right? So he says, I'm not complaining against Hyrcanus, I'm complaining against you. You're the Sanhedrin. If you're going to pater him, he will one day become a ruler and he'll punish you. And Josephus says that Taka came true, because when Hyrcanus became king, he killed the whole Sanhedrin, and he killed Hyrcanus himself, his own master. And the only person he left alive was this Samius, which I guess is Shimon ben Shetach, except that according to the chronology, it doesn't work out. But basically, he only left this one tzaddik alive. Mm-hmm. So the exact same story, but he told him in a quite slightly different way. All right. So what's the point of this all? The point is that when you're under a king, you can't judge that king. Mm-hmm. So the same way, if you're going to judge whether to participate in the state of Israel, you're basically judging whether there can be a state of Israel. That's part of the judgment. Yeah. So if you're poskening that there can't be a state of Israel, under the state of Israel, you're kind of going against your own government that's ruling over you, and you're going to be in danger. Anyway, Behuva halacha zu gam berambam perik beis milchus Sanhedrin perik gimel milchus malachim. The Rambam brings it down that you can't judge a king. V'din zeh im liishtatif b'mucha. So therefore, this question, whether to make a political party and join the Knesset, or to vote, it depends on the question of whether their government should exist. right? Not like those who say that the Rebbe only asked her voting because of Zaitika reasons, not because of the Shalosh Shavuos. The Rebbe is saying clearly here it is totally in the Shalosh Shavuos. So therefore, the government is getting judged by whoever paskins this question. So we have the takana of Chazal and Sanhedrin Yudches Shaloi Ladun Ala Melech, that you can't judge the king Mishu Tachis Memshalto if you're under him. Besides the fact that they can't paskin for a different reason. He says, "Machmas halacha sheivesi leel midivrei harishonim af bishar alim sheyesh beir." The Rishonim speak about a case of any strong person who's in a city, right? At any time there's a strong person in a city, even if you're not
go to another city, judge him.
Right? Then it's in siman kuf mem hey. By the way, the Rebbe brought this down already. That when there's another when there's people in the city who are very strong, the bezdin of that city shouldn't be the one to judge. Okay, that we're afraid that he'll be biased, because he'll be afraid of the strong man. Therefore, we take the din toyer to a different city. So that's by any city, but kol shekain, this applies to a ruling government. Besides the fact that you have the takanas to Rishonim that we mentioned in Siman Kuf Mem Hey, but there's also this din of Sanhedrin Daf Yudches that you can't down a melech. The takana that was made in the time of Shimon ben Shetach, not to down a melech.